Well, welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us again tonight. Tonight we're making beef and broccoli. And this is not the kind of beef and broccoli you would get in a Chinese restaurant. This is kind of something I made up. So you can pause, write down the ingredients, and hey, if you like this video, show us with a thumbs up and subscribe. We'd appreciate it. Well, I have here a chuck steak, not a great cut of beef, but cheap. So we're going to try to turn it into a great cut of beef. On the other hand, this is a really nice head of broccoli. Not homegrown, but good. And I'm going to show you how I cut up broccoli. And I know most of you probably know how to cut up broccoli, but I'm going to show those who don't. With broccoli, you cut off the stem. And then the little florets will separate, and you may have to do a couple of cuts on the stem. But we want this to be not too big. We're going to steam it. It's going to be part of a bigger dish. And I just find if you just cut through the stalk, the stem, and not cut the head, then you get less I guess you'd call it flaking off. If you cut through the head, then it sort of falls apart. So I just run a little cut down through the stem and then separate it by hand. I'm throwing this for right now over in a colander, but I will tell you a little secret about broccoli, especially homegrown broccoli. You want to soak it for about 20 minutes in some salt water. And the reason is because there are several pests that just love broccoli, and they hide and you can't see them. I have gotten some from the grocery store. I have heard of people getting it from homegrown. So we'll just put about a tablespoonful of salt into a bowl of water after I get this all cut up. And we'll let it soak, and if there are any little pests hiding, they'll come out. I know, yuck, but better to know it if you didn't, and to prevent finding a little surprise. So some months back, I found these on sale really cheap, and I don't usually buy chuck steaks because, you know, they're kind of difficult to cook tender. But we can make this one tender. You just have to kind of work at it. So I'm drying it off. You should always dry off beef before you cook it. Otherwise it just doesn't brown right. So one way to cook beef that's not your prime cuts and to make it more tender is to slice it thinly against the grain. And I'm going to trim off some of the fat here. And it's kind of hard on video, but I'm going to try to show you how to determine where the grain is. And you may know this, but a lot of people don't. On one side of the beef, you're going to see what almost looks stringy. You can see like the cords, and that is the grain, and you want to cut against that. So I'm going to make little, if you can see that, I don't know if you can see that, but I'm going to make little thin slices, and on one side you can see the grain, and on the other side it's much smoother. So we're going to slice thin slices against the grain, and some may be long, some may be short, but we're going to try to get them the same, close to the same thickness. I'm going to trim that little silver membrane off. So we're wanting it to cook all at about the same time, and that's going to be determined by the thickness. So you see there? And you see the smoothness there. So it's all cut up. Now we're going to prepare it, and I'm going to sprinkle over this meat my dry rub, which is equal parts kosher salt and brown sugar, or in my case, brown sugar substitute. And that's pretty important to the flavor, so you could just whip some up really quickly. just half and half, brown sugar or substitute, and kosher salt. Mix it in well. You know, salt makes meat tender, helps seal in the juices, helps it brown, gives it good flavor. So I've got a little excess over here on the side. I'll trim the fat off, put the lean in my bone broth bag. Here we are at the stove, got my cast iron pan. I've had it on. It has a 1/4 cup of sunflower oil, and I'm gonna put the beef in. You could tell it was hot enough if you could see it, because you could see the ripples in the oil. I've got this on a medium heat because I want to brown these well, and they'll cook pretty quickly because they're pretty thin. I don't know, I might have to trim that big one again. And I'm laying them out separately because I want them all to brown. And if you don't have a cast iron skillet, you don't have to use a cast iron skillet, but really you're going to get great results with a cast iron skillet. We want to heat these up pretty quickly because we want to sort of seal them. And we are going to cook them pretty much done in this step. They'll simmer a little bit later, but mostly we want them done. And because you know you can really never have too much butter, I'm going to drop a couple of little tiny bits of butter in here, and there is a reason for that. The butter is being added for the flavor. I didn't add it to start with because I don't want it to burn, but it's going to help the taste so much. You know, different fats just have different attributes, and they're really not just interchangeable. If you have something that says vegetable oil or sunflower oil, it doesn't mean you can use olive oil instead. Different fats are better at different temperatures, and butter adds flavor. You know, it still has some milk solids in it, and of course, you know, it just tastes wonderful. So time to do a little turning, and yeah, I'm going to cut that one. It's just a little bit too big. And we're looking for this brown color. We almost want it to caramelize on the bottom. So if you can see we're getting that, I'm going to give these a turn. Not quite ready yet though. But you can see we're getting there. We want them to be almost crispy. There we go. This is what we're looking for. Brown all over, almost crispy. There's a flavor that comes at that stage that you don't get before. So I'm putting these in a bowl, not on a paper towel, because I want to catch any of the juice that comes off. So we want to reserve a 1/4 cup, which is about what's in there, to make gravy with. And I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour and stir that in. We're just basically going to make brown gravy. And alert, alert, we had a camera malfunction. My cameraman, me, and my cook, me, didn't communicate. So my editor, me, is going to drop in a little clip from an earlier video on brown gravy so you can see the whole process. So don't panic when you see it change. So we're going to brown this flour until it smells like pie crust and we're getting a good color. Now we're going to slip to another clip. So this is me several months ago making brown gravy, and we're at the same place. The thing about brown gravy is that it doesn't get its color from your broth. It gets its color from the process here where you let it brown, sort of toast in the pan. So what we have here is a roux, that's the fat and the flour, and I have it on a medium heat, and it's really important to stir, because otherwise it'll scorch, and we don't want it to scorch, we want it to brown. And when we get that nice brownness, we're going to add 2 cups of room temperature or colder broth. And you pour in a little, and then you pour in a little more. and it'll thicken as you go. And I added this a little faster than normal because the broth was not as cold as I would have liked it. But if the broth is good and cold, then you add it just a little bit at a time. And I hope that wasn't too distracting. Now we're back to today. And I'm stirring this. It's still very, very thin. We're going to let it come up to a simmer. When we see some bubbles, we'll take the next step. You know, my camera person, my cook, and my editor are getting old and forgetful. They forget things like turning on the camera. Luckily, they have me to watch out for them. So we're giving this a little taste to see if it needs any more salt. It does not, because remember the beef was salted. So you see the thickness we have there. It's pretty thin, and that's what we want. We're just looking now. We're going to get some bubbles, and we're going to add the meat back in. It's going to cook a little while, and that's going to soften the meat up, tenderize it a little more. I'm just going to leave this on a simmer, and put a cover on it, set it on the back burner on simmer, and just forget it while I prepare the rest of the dish. So you see the bubbles. We've got it at a good simmer now. My new stove has a low BTU burner, and I find I use it all the time. So I'm going to put the lid on, and this will probably end up being about 12 to 15 minutes that it's going to simmer. And I'm going to move it back to the back on this low BTU burner, but you can do it on your stove if you don't have one, just by turning it down to low. We just want to maintain the little bubble. So let's get to our veggies, and we're going to steam our broccoli, but not the way you normally steam them. This is butter. I've got it to a bubble. It's not browning yet, it's just to a nice bubble. And I'm going to drop my onions in on the bottom. And I know you don't usually start a steam with butter, but you know, this works really well. We're going to use the onions on the bottom to hold the broccoli up out of the butter, mostly. And the onions are cut in nice big chunks so they'll hold the broccoli up and not get too soggy. So that's 1/8 of a teaspoonful of cumin. I'm adding 1/8 of a teaspoonful of red pepper flakes. You can use black pepper. And 1/8 of a teaspoonful of salt. And we're going to stir these around. We want to get a little of the butter coating on them, and mix our salt and cumin up. And let me just tell you, you really do want to use cumin. It really is the perfect flavor for this. So I'm going to put the broccoli on top. I mean, if a little of it gets down in the butter, it won't hurt a thing. And I'm doing the same spices again: cumin, red pepper flakes, and a little salt. And yeah, the red pepper flakes are so good in this. If you like black pepper, go ahead and use it. But really, the red pepper flakes set this off. And then I'm going to drop a couple little pieces of butter on this. Yes, I know, I use a lot of butter. It's good for you. And everything's better with butter. But I'm doing this because the onions are down in the butter. The broccoli are not going to get down in the butter. So I'm going to let a little of it melt over the top as they cook. And really, it's just a tiny little bit. So we're going to cover this up. And the timing is pretty important. I'm going to set my timer for 5 minutes for this step. And that's going to give the butter a chance to melt, the flavors to go all through the veggies, and then we'll take the next step. We're going to steam them. So 5 minutes on medium heat, 4 out of 9, and look at those nice bright broccoli florets. to stir it around a little bit. The onions will be doner, but they will not be soggy. You see we have the juice down in there that's been steaming, this broccoli, and I'm adding half a cup of beef broth. I'm going to cover these back up 7 minutes. If you want them crisper, you can go 5 minutes. If you want them a little doner, you can go longer. Now I put my rice on right before I started the veggies, and we're going to check on the beef. It's been simmering in the gravy. The gravy's thickening up. The meat will be so tender. And the 7 minutes is up. There are our beautiful steamed veggies. The color, you can tell by the color that they're steamed right. So we want to plate this pretty quickly. Here's the rice. I'm going to put some broccoli and onions on top of the rice. We don't want it to get soggy. So you don't do your veggies until you're ready to plate. And then I'll put some of the beef and gravy on top of this, and then I'll show you what we got. So here we have it. And you see why I wanted that beef browned so nicely. It really makes a beautiful presentation. Now the rice, I didn't tell you about the rice, is something called Royal Blend, which is a mixture of basmati and some wild rice. And it works really well with this, but you can use any rice. The beef has cooked until it's tender, and it's beautiful. And it just tastes grand. That little tiny bit of brown sugar or substitute really makes a difference. Let's try this rice. I recommend this. This is fairly easy to find. Basmati rice, Texmati rice, Royal Blend, they all have a really unique flavor. And you can see that this broccoli still has a little crunch. It still has a beautiful color, but it has a sort of buttery, beefy taste. I'm just really happy with this. I've got to try an onion. The onions are a little dunner than the broccoli, and that's okay. They make a great base to steam almost any vegetable on. So I hope you try this. I'm really glad you joined us tonight. We would really love it if you would subscribe to our channel and like our videos and watch them all. I'm going to eat a while now. Thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you, and hope to see you again tomorrow.